Hey everyone, welcome to B&H. Thanks to GTech and B&H for having me out today. To everybody online and everybody that's here in person, thanks for coming out. My name is Jim Godoldik. I'm a cinematographer and director, sometimes technologist. I have a production company / labs called White Rose Studios, based out of LA and Portland. I'm originally from the East Coast. I used to work right down in Broadway, so I've dealt with both LA traffic and New York traffic heavily, and now some of that traffic's coming up to Portland. But I'm here today to kind of talk through a bunch of my work, a lot of stuff that I've been kind of into for the past 8 to 10 years, going through traditional cinematography, post, and VFX workflows, and now heavily into a lot of mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, volumetric capture, and kind of how those worlds play back and forth related to just how traditional capture and production and post-production has changed so much in the past, even 5 years alone. Looking a lot at the necessities both on set, in studio, and archiving, what we're doing with all this data that we're capturing in the field, in the studio situation, and then what we're doing with all that. So this is me. I got my start in production and post-production as an editor and a visual effects artist. I started off working here in New York City for a lot of the studios and boutiques as a online editor and senior visual effects artist. I'd say the first time that I got into VR was actually through stereoscopic back in like 2009 through to the boom of stereo kind of dying off of 2011, 2012. A lot of those workflows have come kind of fully back into virtual reality in terms of live action production, shooting monoscopic and stereoscopic. One of the rigs that is stereo is the GoPro Google Jump, the first iteration of a jump-ready camera up there with the GoPro Odyssey, and a lot of other cameras in here. This is also kind of a newer version of that from Yi, which is the Halo, which is another Google Jump-ready camera system. A lot of those projects that you see from these cameras have wound up on YouTube. A lot of the jump-ready platforms content has wound up on YouTube 360 because of its support for both mono, stereo, and VR 180. So yeah, I've had a pretty fun career of playing around with technology very early, from motion control to robots, a fun Motion Impossible rover, which allows us to get a lot of those repeatable moves or movements in VR that a lot of people early on thought VR had to be pretty restricted to either static, because we didn't want to induce vomiting of having too quick of a movement, which a lot of people who have motion sickness, dealing with a lot of fast-moving action or quick parallax effects going on. Everything from RED cameras to Phantom cameras, custom solutions. Let me just switch over and show you some of this stuff. Let's play a quick reel for you. So that was a little mix. I didn't want to keep it too long of a lot of the projects that I've worked on over the years. So for probably about almost a 3-year period, I actually took a break from production and decided to join friends at GoPro, where I headed up their cinema and advanced tech division, kind of working on cinema broadcast and kind of what was on the future. This was before VR kind of got the bigger uptick in terms of a lot of the 360 cameras that were starting to hit the market. Nowadays we have tons of choices to choose in terms of image capture for VR 180, 360, even to coming into volumetric capture these days. I left GoPro in about 2016, started Wairua, where we really focus on kind of production of the future, mixing a lot of the technologies today from game engines with Unreal and Unity through to looking at how image capture as a whole is evolving, even from a single DSLR through to cameras like, here you go, Insta360 ONE. Something even 5 years ago to have something like this in your pocket would be pretty amazing. Now we have these things that are very cost effective that you can just go inside the store right here and pick up one of these, and you're shooting an equivalent of almost 6K in terms of 360 capture. So a lot of this stuff you can stream direct to a lot of the social media platforms that are available today. And that's a thing I think a lot of us in production, VR, AR, or traditional 2D production or animation, is that we're getting into these new areas or these new mediums in mixed reality. And mixed reality is kind of like that term of the overarching of mixing VR, AR together, and having mobile experiences from your iPhone or your iPad to location-based entertainment, which would be something in store, at a museum, maybe at the garden, where you could have everything from projectors and using technology like projection mapping with live visuals. If you go down to the new Atlanta stadium for the Falcons, the Mercedes-Benz, they have one of the largest spherical screens in the stadium. And a lot of that content that was shot for those screens was multi-camera capture. So they're using a bunch of red weapons in a spherical setup, which I'll show you something similar to it in a minute. But we're dealing with these large data sets. So in traditional broadcast, we're used to doing that from a multi-camera. So your live director's calling your ISO shot. You've got upwards of 17 to 20 cameras, depending on if you're covering live broadcast for maybe a political event through to something for the NFL, NHL, NBA, or like a live concert. What we're seeing a lot now is 2D teams running in tandem with 360 teams and doing a lot of this stuff for live visuals. So you could have a Lil Wayne concert where we did just that for a Hulu project for a series called Onstage, having a 2D team deployed with the 360 team. And I'll tell you, the biggest tip I can give anybody in terms of any of this work in 360 VR, AR is as much planning, pre-viz, pre-production, syncing up you can do in person. That is probably going to be one of your best things to do. It's just blocking your shots. A lot of people that have come from the 2D world, traditional production, traditional VFX animation, there's a little bit of a hump to get over at first of kind of getting your brain around 360, especially for live action. A lot of animation and VFX have actually been doing VR. It may have been called different things in terms of its experiential terms pre to the whole VR AR boom. But if you've worked in 3D programs like Maya, Cinema 4D, DAZ, 3ds Max, all of that, sometimes it's a little bit easier to get your headspace into the world of mapping out where cameras can be, honestly, one of the easiest things is grab a napkin or a piece of paper, start off by drawing a sphere to know kind of your boundary line, and kind of blocking out shots. Because in 360 live action, you've got to worry about where the crew is now, because now the crew's in the shot. Everybody's in the shot. Everything's in the shot. And you have to look at that in terms of, is that something you want to see? Do you want to have that kind of blend of like a little bit BTS, a little bit of letting the user feel like their kind of God view, and really kind of hone down, it's like, what experience do you want the end user to be? Because in mostly the 360 live action VR, you're putting it back in the end user's hand. It's kind of like that, the old way of comic books, or how comic books are going now, of like you choose your own adventure. We're actually seeing a lot of that happen in 360 and AR, is letting the user define the experience. And you may shoot multiple scenarios to kind of let them lead this. This was the old way YouTube used to do it, by HTML live linking, where it's like you would have one experience and then you would click on it, which way did you want the experience to go. It's a similar type of way with how the kind of choose your own adventure VR AR is going with live action, kind of putting it back in the user's hands. There's a little bit of what we're working on studio-wise. Either we're taking traditional camera technology that's off the shelf, whether it be something as high-end as a Red Weapon, a VistaVision, Alexa, large format. It kind of goes the gamut. And if that solution doesn't exist, making a solution that fits for each project. And a lot of these productions or projects in AR and VR aren't one size fits all. There is no one camera to rule them all. There is no one OS platform, one computer. It takes teams, and it takes infrastructure. It takes a lot of storage. And it takes a lot of people syncing together in those different teams. Looks like we just had a power save. Just wait for this to come back up. There's some more projects that you saw in the reel. The one up top was actually a really fun project with the Mill and with Epic Games, who are the maker of Unreal Engine. And that would have been the project in the reel that you saw that was going with the Chevy, the live action fiducial trackers. It's basically what these trackers are on the outside, and I'll show you maybe a little bit better picture of that setup. So basically over here, what we have is a spherical red camera rig on top. We have a bunch of fiducial tracking because we had a witness car. But all of the technology that you see here that is being done at the Mill between their teams in LA and New York, and our friends at Epic Games invited us to be part of this project, was the first real-time project. So this actually debuted at GDC, not this past year, but the year before, to show kind of the first real-time production for AR. The cool thing about it is you can actually go back to Epic's website, or the Mill, or even to the GDC, the Game Developers Conference site, and you can see the live presentation of this rolling out, which is really cool. The cool thing about this thing that the Mill has fabricated, which is called the Blackbird, this car pretty much is an electric car that kind of revolutionized the way that the Mill was doing or approaching their car commercials. The wheelbase can change. A lot of this is customizable. To look at it, you see a lot of the traditional VFX tracking markers and gray balls for making HDR maps. But a lot of these frag boxes back here was in a lot of the early stages of prototyping, getting everything to work and having a lot of teams together on it. That was probably one of the most advanced uses of a game engine and using live action technology with CG all in real time. So this wasn't post-rendered, it was all being rendered in real time. So you would basically see the skin of the car on top of this as the car was driving and being filmed. Let me go back a little bit. So, everybody's kind of used to traditional forms of capture, using lots of different cameras out there, everything from small, GoPros and iPhones and GH5s, all the way up to, the big guys of shooting with Reds and Phantoms and camera cars and Moco cranes. That's what a lot of us have been used to, is either doing multi-camera capture with big teams, first and second units, or kind of crack teams out there. A lot of the stuff that I had gotten my start into was from action sports. So I've done a lot of action cinematography and action films over the years. So playing with a lot of these, both from ground and aerial, it's been cool to see the evolution of technology and how fast it's gone just in the past 10 years. The way that we shoot traditional aerial these days, the fact that every one of us has access to inexpensive drones with 1-inch, sometimes bigger sensors on there, depending on what we put on, from little DJI drone all the way up to a heavy octocopter carrying a large format VistaVision capable camera system. It's pretty cool. With that, from going traditional, now we get into taking a lot of maybe these traditional cameras, Reds here, a couple of computer vision and machine vision cameras, DSLRs. A lot of what you're seeing here is more so of volumetric and spherical image capture solutions. This is one rig from my friends over at Radiant Images in LA. We've got Hammerhead VR guys up in the UK. We've got Microsoft. A lot of people, also teams here in Brooklyn, guys at Scatter and James and the team working on Depth Kit. A lot of people pushing volumetric capture for holographic and augmented reality. So we're seeing the scaling of the data sets that we're now putting through these pipelines go up tremendously. So, with a Phantom, you could take one take 4K at 1,000 frames per second, and you could have a few seconds, one take could be 50 gigs. You start extrapolating that out, your data set grows even more. If you're talking about volumetric capture, where you could have 150 DSLRs capturing multiple frames that are raw frames that have to buffer over to a computer system, which is why you see all of this cabling. It has to go somewhere. There is a centralized brain for a lot of this. Your data bandwidth becomes a big part of your thinking going into budgeting this stuff out, looking at the infrastructure. Are you going to buy it and build it, or are you going to go to a studio that may have it? We're seeing more of these pop up from partners. So Intel debuted theirs last year. They have a giant state-of-the-art facility in Los Angeles that they built out, which is a giant volumetric stage. You've got other partners through Microsoft that have been approved. You've got the guys at Hammerhead VR and TimeSlice in the UK. Microsoft has one of theirs in Pacific Northwest as well. You've got MetaStage in LA. So these things are coming online. But the cool thing about it is you don't have to get scared away by thinking you're going to have to build this out. You can do pretty much a similar aspect to getting into like AR 360 and a lot of this stuff, even with off-the-shelf things. I started off a couple years ago messing around with what was previously, before Depth Kit, RGB. You had RGB Toolkit, which would allow you, among with some open source stuff, to be able to take something as simple as a Xbox 360's Kinect, which was basically a depth sensing camera, And this is what you would play and put on top of your TV to play a lot of those early, sports games or other camera systems that would allow you to, use depth sensors for, different experiences. A lot of the stuff was developer access or beta access, and we still see that. Intel has their D400 series depth sensing cameras that are pretty inexpensive that you could buy. A lot of this is Windows based because a lot of the software that is written for it is open source libraries that are predominantly either Linux or Windows based. You can also use this stuff on Mac, and kind of tying in to this solution is a lot of this stuff you tend to see both Mac and Windows workflow environments, either because a lot of production-centric people over the years have favored the Apple OS ecosystem and just the usability because a lot of our phones to our laptops have done it. But as Apple has shifted its focus over the years from the Pro to more of the consumer stuff, we've also seen a gap in the professional need. So I've always been on both ecosystems, at times having multiple boot systems for Red Hat, for Windows, and for Mac OS, just because the diversity of projects that I've worked on over the years have needed different solutions, different softwares that did not either run on Mac or did not run on Windows. So a lot of the time working on this stuff, I may have both. I may have a Mac laptop with me. I may have a Mac Mini. May have, since we're still on Trash Can Mac Pros, that's their nickname is, or having a Mac Pro or an iMac these days on set. It's pretty common. A lot of the stuff that I work on is destination based. So sometimes I could be out in the middle of South Africa shooting, which I think I have a picture of. We go back for a second. This is in nature preserve in South Africa, shooting a Google Discovery project on the Halos, and I will tell you this: there's not a lot of resources for VR in the middle of Africa. It's hard to even get some production. The cool thing is Panavision is in Cape Town now, and I had an awesome grip and support from Panavision working on us with this. But when we're trekking in Mexico City, out in the mountains of Mexico, and you're doing a lot of these productions, you have to think of like, what are you bringing with you? You have to have enough storage. These cameras, actually this Pancake, which everybody seems to like on social media, thinking this is my VR Pancake stack, is that these cameras and these cameras are basically 16 sensors. And because of their design, 16 sensors, they all have a micro SD card per sensor capturing off of that. The data that would be pulled off of this to get it to one centralized SSD or SD card at that time had not been developed. We have different solutions today, whether it gets all funneled into like a codec system or some other centralized brain, like looking at some of those pictures before for the volumetric capture. All of it has to funnel in somewhere, and you have to have storage. We all know kind of that whole HD to 4K, 6K, 8K, just being able to play that back on some of our systems. You can almost think of like what playback and what buffering systems you would need to build out to be able to play back even a 100-frame loop of a holographic or a volumetric capture system. And in those realms, for a lot of the VR 360, still working on a proxy scenario where you may capture 8K, but your preview, you're not going to be playing that back in real time. Even some of the fastest systems out there to play back in 8K real time, unless you're some kind of prototype NHK system that we see at like NAB or IBC or anything like that, can be sustained through on that. So when I'm remote, out in the field, I'm kind of relying on proxy workflows. I'm working a lot with the EV drives over Thunderbolt. A lot of the systems that I'm working on today are, if we're remote, it's Thunderbolt 3 based. Sometimes it's USB 3.0 based. These are kind of awesome between the Mini and the Pro just because of their size and their storage. The Pros now, I start bringing them a lot more with me just because of the capacity and because of the support for Thunderbolt 3. I can get 2K and 4K playback. I'm not going to be sitting there buffering off an entire timeline from Unreal or from Premiere or from Resolve at full bandwidth. That's still choking a lot of systems that are out there. With the EV series, what is also cool is these are just become like a drive dock. So if I have Studio XL or the SSDs, which are these guys. This is actually me last week in a Sprinter van. So another VR shoot. That one just happens to be a GoPro Fusion. You've got the studio drives. You've got the XLs. You've got the SSDs now. You've got the G-Racks. Being able to go from SSD, popping this into an EV reader within an XL. My offloads are that much faster. Or if you're having to be working with a DIT, they 9 times out of 10 have both Mac and PC, or they're running parallels. They're using system drives that I can just bring a Pelican case out with the Studio XL or one of the SSD drives and be able to know that I can hand things off or just have an AC bring stuff over to the DIT. And usually this is more back in a studio scenario, unless you're bringing this thing out in a full Pelican case and having full power. This was just back in our production Sprinter, and that was more so for just checking playback. So basically have the EV SSD here, just have Thunderbolt and USB readers dumping off. For a Fusion, same thing, it's a dual sensor scenario versus something like the Insta360 here. So you've got 2 SDs, you've got a similar solution here where you've got one tiny little system that you're capturing with. Cool thing about a lot of these mobile 360 cameras that you have between Insta360, Zcam, Kandao, Views, a lot of these things are, under $10,000. When we're talking about the consumer cameras, we're talking a few hundred. GoPro Fusions are like $600. Insta360s are even less. But every time one of these comes out, we're stepping it up. So we're in the 5 to 6K range in terms of our effective resolution capture. And anytime in a baseline, people always ask what is that baseline for image capture for live action 360 for VR? And pretty much anybody agrees that's been working in 360 live action for a while is your minimum is 4K. So most of the time when we're dealing with 360 live action, we're having to do the step process through is if anybody's had to build out a production pipeline that you hand over to a line producer and saying, why is it that we need this certain type of budget, and you build out a pre-production through post-delivery pipeline for them, and sometimes they like to see it in a presentation, you hand them over what your traditional pipeline would be. All the processes stepping through of why you need the budget, why you need 10 SSD-based, XLs, or why you need certain solutions of storage. And stepping along those lines is that our productions now for VR and AR tend to split off. Is that it's not just one application stepping through editorial, visual effects, color grading, game engines. If we step into a lot of the stuff for volumetric capture, is looking more like a visual effects pipeline than it is just a traditional 2D pipeline. So you've got tons of other solutions out there, using traditional compositing tools like Nuke, using Substance Painter, Photoshop, reality capture. I don't know how many people have also kind of heard or started getting into photogrammetry, whereas multicam capture is you can either take single point or multi-point image capture. So if you have your iPhone, for instance, you can take basically scan data from your iPhone. Could be an Android, could be, obviously, the better the images that you're feeding into a photogrammetry pipeline like reality capture or some of the other solutions out there from Autodesk, and there's some open source tools, is basically getting a 3D model out of something as simple as this chair that's right here. Could be a prop too. A lot of people have been doing it for a while, both in the scientific, health, academic, even product retail. Everybody remembers the days of Flash and being able to have an interactive site where you could spin around a product like a car or a Nike shoe as you're doing like a Nike ID. Those were early forms of photogrammetry. You would have one DSLR doing multi-point capture, either around or spinning it. Like funny enough, downstairs they have a nice little light table set up that has a little spinning table. That would be another way that you would see early days of photogrammetry or multi-point capture. When you get into this, though, your data of this is, if I wanted to basically have a 3D representation of the front side of B&H, I would probably do two mixtures. I would do a DSLR and maybe a drone. And you're going to have differing capabilities of what the DSLR can probably capture higher end if you're not shooting with a DSLR or a RED or something, or even a Hasselblad on a bigger drone. So you have to take into consideration, how many images. Doing the front face of just the B&H store alone, you'd have thousands of images. And then those thousands of images get fed into the software. So the algorithm then goes through and looks at the differing overlaps between this, almost like it's just another form of stitching for this versus stitching for 360, is taking two halves of the sphere to get one 360 image. So as we grow the data for the need for a lot of these different mediums that we're working in, a lot of times too is I've shot 360 for 2D delivery. And anybody saw last year the Kendrick Lamar video where he had, for Humble, where he had a lot of different mediums mixed together. He had motion control. He had actually a different GoPro solution. He used the GoPro Omni on the bike to get that tiny planet view. That was basically shooting spherical capture for a 2D image, and they just re-warped and repositioned that image in a sphere, and that gave that tiny planet look that we've seen. I think the first person that I remember doing stuff with warped images and fisheye was probably back in the days with Hype Williams and his music videos of him messing with a lot of different technologies and perspectives. So as we go through a lot of this necessities of storage, necessities of how image capture has been changing, how it both benefits us and it makes us rethink how we're getting into any of these productions or projects, whether they be for a client, for the studio you're at, for any artwork, or collaborations you may do. We've seen a lot of cool collaborations happening in the kind of live VJ and location-based entertainment and experiential markets where we've seen a lot of this technology play into it, and we've seen a lot of the use cases where people may think VR, they automatically think headset, which is it's kind of the way that it has been there is VR and AR and mixed reality can have a couple different ways of how you experience it. It doesn't always have to be within a headset. It's really of how you want the end user, either if you want it to be a single experience, that somebody could be transported to a different world, or if we have a group of people, everyone here, everyone watching online, if we wanted them to have similar experiences. Here, we could have something with a dome and projection mapping, and we get one experience. Same people could be having that same feed streamed to home to their, to their Oculus Rift or to their Vive or to their, to an AR headset like a HoloLens or a Magic Leap system. So it really depends on like how we want things to be perceived or to be experienced. I'll jump back and show you another cool project. So I'll kind of talk over this, so you just have to sit here and watch.
Lock it up, guys.
So this is another one for Ford VR. This was for Ken Block's Gymkhana 9. This was another one of the 2D teams deploying with a live-action VR team. And this, at the time that we shot this, it was like everything in the kitchen sink. So Nokia Ozos, GoPro Omnis, this would have been Samsung Gear 360s, nodal-based systems. So don't think that you automatically need to have a 360 camera to be able to shoot for 360 live action.
All right, so here we are in the set of
or volumetric, or volumetric is a different case, but photogrammetry as well. You see these being used very differently in its use cases. You see a lot of the Hollywood films use 360 live action VR for BTS or for red carpet events or for launch systems out there for a lot of entertainment, because a lot of the budgeting for VR was actually coming from marketing budgets early on, from a lot of these companies getting their feet wet in kind of jumping on the VR and AR bandwagon. We saw a lot of that dry up a little bit in 2017 in terms of a lot of companies funding a lot of these projects. But now what we're seeing is everybody's very into augmented reality. And augmented reality may have a melding of three different. It may have live action 360. It may have a mobile experience through like ARKit or ARCore, depending on if you're on an iOS device or if you're on a Google system, and CG. A lot of the experiences, a lot of the games we play on our mobile devices is coming from the main game engine manufacturers, software developers, through Epic Games for Unreal Engine and through the team at Unity. And it seems like every couple months, one person does like a bunch of really cool things in terms of the game engine release and what you can do. And basically the barrier for this stuff has been coming down and down and down in terms of accessibility of hardware and then accessibility to learn this stuff. Most of the game engines today, like Unity, Unreal, they're free. They give you enough assets and education and tutorials that are out there to basically just go and experiment. And that's probably the best thing I can say, is a lot of this stuff that I've been able to be a part of or be on teams and working has been a lot of experimenting. Just like if you were to get a DSLR camera and go out, you're going to shoot a bunch with it. It's going to take you a little while to learn, but then you're going to find your flow for any of this. Same as a piece of software. The more you use this stuff, the more you experiment, the more you get to know the nuances and what does work and what doesn't work. 360 doesn't work for everything. Sometimes 360 for 2D works better. Sometimes you're going to find out placing certain things within a 360 environment or even an AR game or an AR experience. It may not work. So you've got to keep dropping builds on your phone and testing, or your iPad or any of this stuff. And and kind of keep rolling with it. This was crazy. And I know you're going to say, so this is a Sikorsky helicopter. We were dragging a Ford Raptor underneath it, and Ken was basically doing donuts around it. We're hanging VR cameras all over the place. So this is actually cool. This is, you can download the Ford VR app. You can also check it out on YouTube under the Ford Performance, Ford VR, and also the Hoonigan channel for all the Gymkhana series. So a lot of the planning that I'm doing today, and a lot of these projects is it's always evolving, and every day that a project comes in, or I have an idea for a project, or I'm collaborating with some friends, even if it's not a paid gig, just passion project, because I think that's where a lot of the fun experimenting and also the creative freedom comes, is that comes from kind of music videos and artistic projects, but also just getting together with friends or meeting people, whether it be online or in user groups, or coming to events like this and meeting people that are varied. As much as every one of us would like to try and tackle everything as best we can and do all these projects, it's just not feasible. And sometimes you need somebody who's way better at Unreal or Unity, or you need to hire a DP that knows VR. And we're seeing a lot of people that are kind of newer to the ranks coming up that are getting a good mix of skill set, where you're getting more generalists that understand technology but also understand production and pipelines, and understanding that planning this stuff out and looking at it from a broader perspective of like what it's going to take to get these projects done, and having like a good understanding of it. It's always good, even from traditional production, was like if I was on set, I would kind of creep over the DIT's shoulder, see what he was doing in terms of his workflow for doing looks or setting looks with DP and director, if that wasn't my role and I was maybe doing more of a VFX soup thing. Because at some point, depending on your role, you're going to touch either a piece of hardware or software, image, if you're a PA, maybe coffee cup. But if you're on set, your eyes and ears should just always be open, and be open to learning about this. I'd say my goal for every project that I do is always to learn something new, and look at what each person brings to the table on this, because it's always, whenever we do production, it doesn't matter what kind of production we're doing, it definitely will fall apart if you don't have a good cohesive team. So I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of friends and a lot of very talented people on all sides of that, from producers to designers to artists to visual effects artists to TDs, developers, you name it. And I always try to geek out with them to learn more about what it is their role is and what they do. When I used to work at studios a lot more, I would be that guy that would stay late. When I worked on a kids animation show, I would hang out with the designers, and then I would hang out with the storyboard artists, and I would hang out with the vis effects artists, all to just see how this stuff all comes together. And a lot of that is kind of being in this industry for a little while and kind of paying attention to this stuff, but also paying attention to just how quick technology changes and how fast it changes these days. And it doesn't hurt to kind of have your finger on the pulse to looking at that. So if you're Mac centric, I'd say it's probably time to maybe get your feet wet and working another OS. If you're centric to one particular software, like Final Cut 10, maybe giving Premiere a try. If you're, in Unity, giving Unreal a try, and kind of flexing there. You never know when these different tools are going to come up, and just having understanding of like, if you're going to spit something out from Nuke or Final Cut or Premiere or Resolve or Unity, and it needs to go be handed off to another artist or to another studio. If you happen to be that person that's getting hired and you have to do the handoff, it's always good to know when you're handing off a project or when you're handing off a drive that that person on the other side can read that drive. One trick that's really helpful with a lot of the newer Thunderbolt 3, USB 3 G drive systems is using the Paragon plugin on Mac or Windows, because a lot of the drives in production world, you're usually getting handed either a G drive, a RAID, an EV sled, something like that, and you hear along the pipeline a producer or somebody can't read the file, and not everybody is as technology savvy as the next person. So what I like to do is on the base root of every drive that I send out, I put an FAQ on it. So at least the text file is readable in pretty much any any part of the world. And I put a text file on there telling them what's on the drive if they don't have the right software where they can do. So I would always link pre to G-Tech now bundling the Paragon plugin. I would have a link out to the Paragon software. So if it's exFAT formatted versus NTFS, you may have discrepancies where you've got that one producer that's not on a MacBook and they're on a Dell system or an HP system. They plug this in through USB or Thunderbolt, and they're like, I can't get the drive to mount. Usually that FAQ or that email telling them or having a link. The good thing about this too is if you can keep a Google Drive or a Dropbox link of the DMG or the zip of the plugin, and I always just send it out to people just so they have that on there too, in case at times we don't always have internet or hotspots with us in the middle of nowhere. They can grab it from the hotel, or they can, you can send it with a PI or somebody on a jump drive, and they can just download it and be able to read the perspective formatting for the different systems that are out there. The one cool thing that I do a lot about it is, so traveling, when I came here this week, I'll have my book bag and have my cameras. I don't think in the past 5 years or so that I haven't always gone with at least 2 to 3 drives in whichever backpack I was doing. And the rule of thumb is if you have 2 backups, you need a third. And that's always how I've done it, and a lot of places do it, is if you're traveling 2 people take 2 separate planes, because if one plane goes down, God forbid, your media still gets to it, to its destination, or you're FedExing it. So this cool thing is there's a lot of tools out there that I use, everything from like Carbon Copy Cloner to rsync, and just basically make a direct copy of each of the media out there. And a lot of times when you're working with a new agency or a producer or a studio or a boutique, and if you are working in the higher levels of that where you can be a shot caller, if you're DP, a VFX soup, if a director, a line producer, any of that, and you can make the call over what media is being used. Because in the end, how many people have shown up on set and you've got like a USB 2 based drive where they're like, oh yeah, we just ran to Best Buy and bought these. That'll kill you either on set or in post waiting for the offload before you can hand off these drives, because time is money. The cool thing about a lot of this stuff today is you can go to Best Buy, Amazon, B&H, a lot of this, and you're finding Thunderbolt 3, Thunderbolt 2, and USB 3 drives, like the Minis, the Pros, and the EVs. And we've got this whole thing where price just keeps coming down and our storage needs keep coming up. We were even talking earlier about what do you do for these? The longevity of moving from spinning disk-based media to SSDs. Media, no matter who makes it, at some time, could be spilling coffee, could be lost drive, could be any of that. You're going to want to have the backups. Usually what I do with the rack systems or with any of the Thunderbolt-based systems or the XLs is backing up to tape too, just as an extra precaution. I don't think I've backed up media to, say, HDCam SR or HDCam DEC in a long time. Haven't needed to. It still happens, but still backing up from the physical media to something like an LTO drive, either at the studio or sending it out to get backed up to LTO on top of this. Because just like everybody else, I've got the closet full of G drives. Some of my G drives date back to the first G drives back in like 2004, 2005. That's kind of how long I've been using G-Tech, back when G-Tech was a tiny little company after the original owner, Roger Mabin. I bought my first G drive before it was ever in the Apple stores. I think they first started popping up in the Apple stores in around 05 or 06. But yeah, I've kind of been on the long haul. I've sworn by the reliability. The only time I had a G-RAID fail on me was because I dropped a keyboard on it while it was backing up. And you don't ever want to hear the click, click, click of a spinning disk. It's not a good sign. But luckily, I had a backup for that stuff too. But yeah, I think, where we're going today in terms of our AR, VR, image capture, production world is that it's still going to keep evolving. I think as a target, we see all the solutions out here on the floor here of like Vive and Rift setups and Oculus Go, and on the AR side we've got HoloLens and Meta and Magic Leap, and haven't seen what Apple's going to do yet in terms of if we see some AR glass style system tied to our iPhone 12, 15, whatever it may be. It's always going to be kind of shifting your workflow to fit the needs of whatever this is. So you may be shooting on a bunch of consumer, prosumer type of devices today. Next day you're shooting on systems like this where you'll chew through terabytes within 4 or 5 day shoot, just like that. And looking at the way that these systems are kind of evolving and changing, this stuff's going to shrink over the next 5 years, 10 years. We're going to be looking at this and then looking back to the way that we used to look at like beta and kind of have the heartache for the older technology and the way that we used to do things. So even though a lot of this stuff may look like science, and it kind of is science experiments today, is we're going to start seeing it where we've got Planoptic, multi-image sensor, multi-lens system within one body. We see a lot of that with a lot of the camera manufacturers that are either trying to make it work or already have gone out of business in terms of light field technology. We're still a few years away in terms of light field and getting volumetric capture down and accessible to everybody, but I'll tell everybody watching, everybody here, as daunting as this stuff may look, it's actually accessible. Some of these cameras can be really expensive. Some of the machine vision cameras that are out there, some of them can cost $30,000, $40,000 for a single camera solution because they were initially made for different industries. But we're getting into people even using the Sony RXOs, their little POV GoPro competitors, and building light field arrays out of those. The guys at Radiant in LA have been doing it. The guys in Brooklyn at Scatter are using DSLRs. They're using different image capture solutions out there. looking at what MIT and Stanford and a lot of the colleges out there and research facilities. A good eye to keep on top of this too is see what's going on at SIGGRAPH every year, because a lot of this in terms of animation and visual effects, mixed reality and volumetric capture and image capture pipeline stuff, we get to see a lot of that stuff be talked about in white papers and technology presentations of like what's coming down the line. And then it's always a trickle-down effect. The stuff that's you're seeing on big Hollywood sets was technology that is kind of now in our iPhones. So it's gonna happen. It's been happening. You basically have a depth sensing, multi-camera, multi-sensor capable capture device in our pockets today. So we can do a lot with just an iPhone or some of the newer phones that are out there, Sony and Android-based phones that allow you to do it. But I think if anybody has any questions, we've got a question right here.
Sort of different directions.
Yeah.
You referred several times to VR where you shoot 360 for 2D delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Did you bring any examples, or could you share an example where you did that?
Yeah. Let me see what I have here so I can pull up.
Question, please.
So the gentleman was asking about shooting 360 for a 2D delivery. One of the easiest ways to talk about that too, or kind of people that are used to doing, is if you're shooting 360, you've got all this image data that you have out there. I almost liken it to doing a pan and scan from traditional large format. Is basically over capturing and then pulling out from, like a pan and scan technique, is pulling out where action is on that. A lot of people have termed that now, GoPro and Insta360 and all that, they've got their kind of marketing term for over capture. That's exactly what you're doing, is you're capturing more in terms of the resolution for the delivery you may be doing. One of the projects that I just did, we did it, I can't show from that one, but what you would see even from the Ken Block one is, let's see, did the same thing too for the Lil Wayne project. Let me see if I have that one here. Well, if I had an internet connection right now, I'd pull it up. But the trailer for the Hulu VR Lil Wayne on stage, or the whole on stage series that Hulu is doing, you'll see different forms of 360 where in post or VFX will extract where the subject is or where action is. And basically we have this whole palette, if you will, this whole canvas to play around with where action is and where we want people to do that. One of the things that you see a lot of that now with how people are using overcapture, or how a lot of the manufacturers are touting it too, is using overcapture and then basically keyframing the move within your 360 sphere. So a lot of the, I think like the launch reels for a lot of the, kind of prosumer and 360 cameras out there have shown good examples of that, where if you're starting off with a sphere, but your action is going all around that, how do you deliver that for a 2D experience for someone to see at like a POP display, or for just a 16 by 9 trailer for a platform on social media that doesn't support 360 yet? We've got Facebook 360, but if your delivery's for Instagram, you've got a couple ways to deliver for a social media platform that doesn't support spherical image or spherical movie files. Is that you would basically keyframe the move, or what we use call neck edits, is in a headset you're potentially doing this. You're exploring your surroundings. You're exploring the world that you're being brought into. A lot of the ways that you can do that too is through post and through some software, sometimes some scripts, is if you want to record the positional movement of the headset, or have a piece of software that's kind of tapped on almost like a plugin or a script, is you can basically set keyframes as the move is being done. You can also do this without having someone in and basically just take your phone. So for like Insta360 on the phone, you can basically take this, and the same thing for GoPro Fusions is within the software, is you can reposition where action is. So you can do that right from the mobile app, or you can do it from Premiere with the Metal plugins, or you can do a lot of this stuff in different stitching tools that are out there, and basically be able to do like your center cut extraction like you would for pan and scan, and deliver that for the 2D perspectives. A lot of that happens for the non-360 social media platforms, where your deliverables that would usually be, you've got commercial, you got your 60 or 30 or 15s for your cut downs for social media, for Facebook, for all this stuff. But now you have your regular 2D deliverables, but then you've got your 360 deliverables that are branched off for like, okay, you've got your 360, but then we have to do the cut down of that cut for 2D and 360. So how could you do it? I've seen a lot of people too just take your equirectangular finish and just crop that to a 16:9 for action safe, and then deliver that for a 2D experience. Don't really have to do it too much for YouTube and Facebook 360 because they support those platforms support 360 image playback. Same thing for mobile. It's some of the social media platforms that don't, like Snapchat and Instagram. You take it to the next step, and then you've got customized players that are out there, white label players that you can basically reskin for a particular, you're doing some kind of event for Smirnoff or whatever brand you want to put out there. You can white label a 360 player just for that event, or send things at the Garden. You can do the same things for that and just pull out from there. You had another question?
I did, it's over on AR. Where are you seeing it going in terms of the sort of two types of AR? I'll go to the Sports Center AR, which is the AR in the story.
Yep.
Versus the interactive AR, which is like the AR in the game.
Yeah.
Where do you see the trend?
I see. So the question was, where do I see, or where do we see AR going in terms of the interactive AR? The example of kind of like the big one that hit for the Weather Channel with the big storms, and having that in studio part of the story where the telecaster or the host is actually using the environment and using the technology to take someone through that. We see a lot of that in sports, in science, and in broadcast heavily right now, as they're the ones jumping on a lot of this within AR. Then in terms of the experiential, or like kind of location-based, is you've got a melding of those technologies. So what we're talking about, and what we're seeing there, is we're seeing virtual production, which has kind of been around broadcast for a long time. Broadcast has also been having the infrastructure to kind of do these test beds a lot of the time, because one, it takes ratings way up to bring something new to the old boob tube here, and two, how do you get that kind of fall off of what the second screen experience was always? Now everybody's on their phone the same time they're on Netflix, or they're doing something here the same time they're watching, the Nets play, or the Yankees, or whatever it is. I don't think that is going to go away, of someone having this the same time that this is up, or having this the same time that they're watching a game. I think the lines are blurring to where those technologies are just meeting at the middle. I think that you're going to see more and more of the virtual production become the norm. We're seeing more of it come into play. That's a lot of what the Blackbird project was. You're seeing a lot of that in terms of the Weather Channel example, and a lot of the broadcast events that you're seeing on, CNN and all these other ones test bedding. It went from the giant touch screen, let's go interactive here, to there is no screen anymore, and everything is being done with basically trackers in the ceiling and tracking on the floor, where in virtual production you're going to be basically mapping out that studio ahead of time. So you'll be using trackers in the ceiling. You'll have multi-camera capture where you have like an NCAM system on the broadcast camera. An NCAM system, or for anybody that's never seen it, so you have your traditional ENG camera. This could be a RED, could be a DSLR too. You basically have a stereo depth camera underneath that. So your traditional camera is giving you your regular RGB data through here. Your stereo depth camera here is giving you depth. It knows where I am, it knows where this is, it knows where the car is. So I'm basically mapping out the space or mapping out the volume ahead of time so that when I move my camera, my virtual Ford or my virtual lava flow for whatever the story is, or my 50-yard line, that's probably a good example to show, is everybody's seen AR working without maybe knowing it's AR from NFL. Is that similar technology of capture and tracking data in real time? We've always seen it with the yellow line. We've been seeing AR and a lot of these technologies creeping in over time and just kind of not known what it is. But that kind of falls under virtual production and augmented reality or multi-point capture. And a lot of that stuff too is you're still recording the ISO feeds. You're still recording that tracking data. You're still recording all of that. So you're now adding more layers to that. It's because the traditional ENG cameras in the studio are now capturing depth on top of that and could be capturing a lot more. You're also feeding in to the Chiron or the VizRT or to whatever that is, different type of graphics package, where the graphics package is not only linear 2D data that somebody made in After Effects or Illustrator. Now you're probably squeezing in a Unity project or an Unreal project underlining that is then tracked in real time to know where everything is in the studio or at a stadium. We're starting to see, I think that happen more and more with the NFL has actually been doing it a lot more lately of adding this technology. Intel has been pushing it too and partnering with the NFL and the NBA of looking at multi-point capture. We've got 4D, which is a term that's thrown out there a lot, but it has a lot of different meanings, is that fourth dimension of capture, where we have multiple camera systems around the stadium at different levels that give us that whole cheated time slice, matrix effect of wrapping around the player going into the end zone. Hype terms kind of throw it as 4D capture. It's basically a different style of volumetric capture and a different delivery. If you look at the demo video for Intel's studio, they'll give you, kind of that time slice. You've always seen it from the arrays at the, Photo Plus and NAB and IBC and all that. You've always seen, the time slice effect of either the full 360, Nikon or Canon-based or a Sony-based DSLR system. You got somebody jumping in air and it just freezes and the camera rotates around them. We've all seen it from the Matrix. So this technology has just been evolving in different forms of it. And I think where the AR stuff is coming from in the studios, people see it and they think it's cool. They're not really sure how the technology or how it's getting done. I think that's a little bit of an evolving story of people to really kind of get their heads around even what an Oculus Rift or a Vive is going to do for them, why they would buy it. I still think we have a little bit of a barrier in terms of VR and AR. I think it's a little bit easier for AR because instead of me handing you all a headset or something to put on or a Google Cardboard, if I just go, hey, pick up your phone and either download an app or go to this website, and you don't have to do anything, so your barrier of technology or your barrier of somebody to kind of get their head around, oh, okay, I just hold up my phone and it's a window into this world. Or Pokemon, I don't know how easy that is to show someone Pokemon and the AR capabilities of chasing Pokemon around New York City or wherever you are, and having them interactive to it. That's where the potential just leads so much farther of getting people to interact with a movie, a game, a live action game. I wouldn't doubt that we wouldn't see Broadway at some point, with the whole live action blend of CG and all that, that maybe The Lion King on Broadway ties into the new Lion King movie that we see that Jon Favreau is doing, where he's using tons of virtual production, and we don't see an AR tie-in of that, of like, go to the studio, go to Broadway, try to find Simba, you know, like you would a Pokemon. And there's so many avenues for this stuff. We haven't even touched on science and technology and health, which is really eager for a lot of people. If you want to go after a lot of projects and go after some funding, do stuff in science and research and health and wellness for AR and VR. It's unrealized, like, just how much potential is in all of this stuff. So I would say, if you're not getting your feet wet in VR and AR, you're probably doing yourself a disservice to just not even go in and research it a little bit and experiment. You don't have to buy anything. A lot of this stuff, just to get in and mess around with Unreal and Unity, and if you have After Effects and Premiere and Photoshop and an iPhone or Android device, you've got a lot of the tool set to do this. You know, you could, like I said, you could take your iPhone and you could use the same photogrammetry software that I use. There's Bellis, there's all these different apps on here. If you just look up photogrammetry on the iOS store, on the Apple Store, you've got things that you can make crude, you know, photogrammetry facial captures of your face, or your kid's face, or the device. Doesn't matter. Any other questions? Pretty quiet. I can't ask anybody questions online, but I'm sure if you guys do. If you want to find me, I will show you an easy way to find me. I'll give you my email. That's my email. It's just jim@whiterosestudios.com. On social media, pretty easy to find me. Instagram, Twitter. It's just Filmbot, FILMBOT. That's where I post a lot of my funny shenanigans and BTS on Instagram, and yeah, you can find me on social media. I'm pretty active, sharing a lot of stuff on there too. But yeah, thank you all for coming out. Thank you everybody online for tuning in and watching. I guess this will be available post record through B&H. Thanks for B&H and for G Technology for having me out. Yeah, I guess that's a wrap for us. Thank you.